Okay, the recording is started.
Great. Hey everyone, my name is Nate McGackie. I am the Executive Director of Arts North Carolina, and today's webinar is entitled Connecting Remotely, Arts Advocacy During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We're going to review several things in regards to some facts and figures, some tips on how to have conversations with legislators, kind of some guidelines for talking about the pandemic and its effect on the arts. And certainly we're gonna kick off with what Arts North Carolina is doing. But to get started, do some housekeeping here. Oh, hold on just one second. There we go. Oh, maybe not. There we go. Please make sure that you're keeping your mics muted during the presentation. If you've got a question, we'll be happy to answer it, but please type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and Christine will read those aloud at the appropriate time. If for some reason that you are unable to type in your questions, we'll have a section specifically for questions at the end, so if you want to hold those to the end, then you can unmute yourself to ask those questions. So please make sure that your mics are muted so we don't have any cross information or cross noise there. That'd be great. Also, please keep your video off at all times. This helps to save bandwidth, and we are certainly using a lot of it these days. And also, I believe we already have the slides up and available on the artsnc.org. For you to be able to use as a reference, and we will be posting this video for free later today. So, so this will be up hopefully later today, if not first thing in the morning. So this will certainly be accessible to anyone who wants it, so you can feel free to share. I do want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors. Not sure everyone saw today, but we officially announced that we would not be having Arts Day 2020 this year. We just could not take the risk of endangering the health of our advocates or our artists, and certainly not the members of the General Assembly. Not to mention we weren't even sure when we'd be able to have it. So, and also the decision came that we wanted to make sure that we were focusing all of our efforts on our advocacy work and serving the arts community in North Carolina. So that said, all of our sponsors for Arts Day that you're seeing on your screen have are generously supporting our programming moving forward. So they're really helping to make this work possible, and these webinars and all of the work that we're doing on behalf of the arts community. So please make sure you recognize those sponsors and see who's out there. Thank them if you have the opportunity, and when we can, make sure you stop by and see them and give them your patronage. So thank you very much for that. So when we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and government, the government is not going to be able to solve all of the problems caused by the pandemic for us. But they are going to be able to help to solve all of these problems with us. And by us, I don't just mean the arts sector, but I mean businesses and nonprofits of all stripes, and even other organizations and companies and governments from other countries. I mean, this is going to be a global community. But in order for us to be able to work together to figure out how we're going to solve the immense challenges that we're going to be facing in the months and years to come, we're going to need to be able to communicate. And communicate means a conversation in two directions. It means speaking and presenting your case and logic and facts and figures, but it also means listening and really hearing what other people are saying, so that that can all become part of the solution. And that communication, that back and forth between us and government, that's advocacy. That's really what it's all about. So at Arts North Carolina, we want to make sure that we're connecting you to the people and resources that you need, and kind of giving you some pointers on how to have these conversations to be most effective. We put together a lot of resources since the beginning of the pandemic. Certainly, I want to kind of run through a few of them with you. We first launched our Arts NC Action and Response Center. You can see here, they'll come up. Right, right here, you can launch to the impact survey, which I'll talk about in a minute. You can also go right here, which is our relief funds page. You have a listing of all the relief funds that have been reported to us in the state for individual artists, as well as those serving arts organizations, and then national funds that are doing the same thing. So kind of a centralized location for those efforts. As well, if you go to the Action Center, you're going to see the link for training resources. This is going to be where you will find the recording of this webinar, as well as past webinars and any future webinars. And then right here, you will find several links, including summary on major federal legislation, updates here about what's been going on, calls to action and updates, where to report your legislators, and other resources for dealing with the pandemic. But we're going to be focusing today on two links right here, the arts sector COVID-19 impact and resources, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, as well as the fact sheet, how the arts impact the North Carolina economy. And these are two tools that we want to make available to you to make sure that you have the information you need to speak with your legislator. Let's see if I can get back. Here we go. So I mentioned the survey, really important that if organizations have not filled out the survey, that they go ahead and click this link labeled Impact Survey, fill that information out. If you have had additional losses or new information about layoffs or other things, I encourage you to please keep taking that survey again and again and again. Americans for the Arts will kind of take that data and sort it out so that it doesn't get repeated. But this is really right now the only tool that we're using to track the financial impact on the arts, both individual artists as well as organizations in the state of North Carolina. And we'll be looking over some of those numbers as well. And I already talked about the training videos and resources site, as well as the Arts NC relief funds for artists and the arts site. So those are the resources available on our site to help you through the pandemic. So when we talk about advocacy during this pandemic, I think the most important thing to remember is that the most important thing the government is doing right now is dealing with the health and safety issues of the population, right? First and foremost, there are people getting very sick. There are people dying. We certainly see that on the news. We are all kind of focused on our silo and worrying about how we can manage our business, but people are being affected by this in many ways. So when having conversations about this, we want to make sure that we're being respectful of that, because those government officials that you might be talking to about the arts and your position in the arts are also having very difficult conversations about public health. So something to always be aware of. Also keeping in mind that this is happening all across the entire world at every level of government, and elected officials are being swamped. They are being completely overwhelmed. So we are encouraging people to start having conversations as it is appropriate and as it is possible via phone or video conference, but certainly remember that legislators and county officials, city officials, even Congress is really busy doing a great many things right now, so keep that in mind. We're going to need to be working at all levels of government, not for the next 2 weeks, but very likely for the next 2 years, just to sort of get our heads around what we're doing. So make sure you're building those relationships in a very patient, polite, and positive way, because it's going to be frustrating on all sides, and we want to make sure that we keep ourselves in check. Also, to see that, just know that Arts North Carolina is working with our lobbyists at the North Carolina General Assembly, as well as other statewide partners in terms of strategy and collecting information, and partners across the country as we work to create strategies and try and find the best way to deliver the right message for the right need at the right time. So we do ask that you kind of continue to stay up to date with what Arts North Carolina is doing. First and foremost, by making sure that you and everybody that you know who is, has an interest in the arts is signed up for the Arts NC email list. It is super easy and quick to sign up, and that is how we keep people up to date on what is going on with the arts and COVID-19, as well as calls to action as to when the best time to talk to Congress or the General Assembly is, or other elected representatives. As I mentioned before, continue to keep updating that survey so that we can have some kind of information about the impact as we're having these conversations. I've already seen that survey get noted in the press before. So please make sure that you're reporting those losses because those figures are being used not only by government officials and us, but by the press as well. Start having the conversations, and we're going to talk about how we enter into those conversations. Federal, state, local level, everybody's impacted, particularly if you have a pre-existing relationship. And then report your conversations and emails to Arts NC. There's an orange button that says report your legislative visit, that if you talk to somebody at the General Assembly via email or just want to put notes from a conversation down, that's really important for us to have a record of how those conversations are going, and then we can report that to the lobbyist, and then that really informs how we move forward. So make sure you're letting us know about the conversations that you're having as well. So one of the first most important things when you're having these conversations with legislators is to let them know how important the arts were before the pandemic and what kind of contribution the arts were making. And you certainly can tell those stories about what your particular organization or your work as an artist was doing to impact people in communities. But it helps, particularly because we're talking about an economic crisis, if you can talk about the economic impact. Now, the most updated figures we have are from way back in 2015, and the economy has been on an upward trajectory, so we can assume that these numbers are going to have been on an upward trajectory as well. But direct spending, we were close to $1 billion at $937.5 million 5 years ago. And then, so those are dollars that nonprofits actually spent in the North Carolina economy. Now, the indirect spending is on things like meals and souvenirs and T-shirts and things that were related to the arts activity, but weren't necessarily the admission to get into that figure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So you add those two together, and you see a total economic impact for the state of North Carolina for $2.12 billion. Politicians like to know about jobs, or just tell me about the jobs. I want to hear about job creation. Well, 37,194 jobs. This was back in 2015, so we know that numbers come up. Those are direct jobs, and those are direct full-time equivalent jobs. So if two people were working 20 hours a week, then that would equate to just one of those full-time equivalent jobs. So you're talking easily 40,000 plus people that we're talking about who are directly employed by the nonprofit arts sector. Those indirect dollars that we talked about, the food, the snacks, the souvenirs, that's supporting another 34,000 plus jobs in the state of North Carolina for a grand total of almost $72,000 or 72,000 jobs. So as you can see, the impact on the overall North Carolina economy is sort of greater than just our direct expenditures and jobs and expenses throughout the state. Certainly tax revenue, very important. Way back in 2015, the state was collecting from nonprofit arts organizations, $94 million, over $94 million. So we're going to be talking about close to $1 billion there, or excuse me, close to $100 million in state taxes. Certainly it's over that now. Most of that coming off sales tax from admission. And then also with local taxes from nonprofits, $107 million, excuse me, and for a total of over $200 million total between state and local government. So you can start to see the importance of the economic impact. This is a little bit of a breakdown of what I was talking about earlier as it relates to where those dollars go. Back in 2015, our numbers were showing that in addition to the cost of admission, so not with the ticket price, but over and above a ticket price to a show or a festival, $30.66 cents per person spent on average. So some people more, some people less. But the really interesting, you can see where all that goes. You can see that a big piece of that is the restaurant industry. So, you know, we can certainly start to draw a comparison between how important the arts recovering is going to be to the restaurant industry recovering as well. Also, the arts brought people in. You can see that the people who, that 1 in every 3 patrons attending an arts event said that they were, they were from out of the county from where that event was happening. And the non-local patrons, the people that didn't live there, were spending over twice as much money. So you can really see it's attracting the visitors, and the visitors have more of an investment bringing in visitor dollars in the local economy. Also, of those people coming, 2/3 almost, 64.6% said the event was the primary reason that they had come. And of those, half of them said that they would have just as soon gone somewhere else. So it's really important to have those arts events are happening within communities, bringing people from the outside, because otherwise they're just going to go someplace else. So important to bring that up when you're talking to legislators. We're also going to need to talk about the impact that we've had in the past so we can tie that into how we're going to build back. Rural counties with performing arts organizations have 3 times more population growth, attract more workers and jobs, and provide higher incomes, right? That's numbers from a 2009 study in the state of North Carolina. Also, those with design-driven businesses recover quicker from recessions, and I think that is going to be something that is very important. Also here in North Carolina, the study showed that creative arts-related jobs in North Carolina counties are proven to be associated with visitor spending, attraction and retention of residents, and rising household income. So again, a creative economy, a nonprofit arts economy in your community is associated with a whole lot of good things that are going to be required for coming out of a recession. Certainly youth programs and providing arts access to children can help them become, particularly those most socioeconomically challenged, 5 times more likely to graduate from high school and twice as likely to graduate from college. And then, of course, the arts are serving in a wide variety of programs for veterans and active service members. So you can start to see that the arts not only got us to where we are, but are going to be a huge piece of what it's going to take to recover after this pandemic. So I think that it's really important as we have these conversations to make sure that you're framing out how you're talking about the impact that COVID-19 is having on the arts. Certainly cancellations is number one, right? We were, even before restaurants were closing, we were shutting down ballets, we were shutting down symphonies, we were shutting down operas. The museums came right after that, the fundraisers. We saw a whole wave of closings right there, right up before they were closing the coffee shops and the delis, right? Now we're starting for a second wave of closings. We're seeing all sorts of cancellations during the summer. I know American Dance Festival in Durham is closed. I saw yesterday Lost Colony, which has been performing every summer for as long as anyone can remember, is not going to be having a season this year. So we can't have these summer things happening. People have already had expenses to get these shows up, that those expenses will not be able to be recouped because there's no money coming in. Not only do you stop sales, but now you're either refunding money or giving people a credit. But even if you're giving people a credit for a future show, that's still a show that is in the future. Now you can't sell that seat for that future show. So it's cutting into your potential revenue. So there's different tiers of revenue loss. Certainly we're all heading into a lot of uncertainty in the fall and what next season looks like and beyond that. And that comes from the fact that we don't know whether or not we have the money to do the programming we were planning on doing, or we don't know what people are going to come out. Is there going to be a lingering fear about gathering in public and being around large groups of people? So there's a lot of uncertainty that we're doing. And certainly donations are in jeopardy. This economy and the impact it has had, while these measures are really needed and important to slow the spread, it has caused our highest wealth individuals and foundations to lose 25% of their wealth. And unemployment is going to skyrocket. I've seen some estimates of up to 30%. So obviously a recession is incredibly likely, though we haven't actually called it yet. So this is going to be a huge issue for arts companies to overcome. So that's kind of a way to sort of walk through the impact. In terms of what the numbers look like, I'm pulling this right off the dashboard from that survey I talked about earlier, right? As of yesterday afternoon, we were at $9.3 million in losses, and that number is going up by 6 figures every day. So you can see that's almost $9 million in direct financial losses, plus $388,000 in additional expenses that are coming up, new software or other expenses for working from home or whatever it is that's causing those expenses, not to mention 313,000 lost audience members. And it's important to point out, this is only the information that has been reported to date. Certainly, 70% of organizations that have responded to this are expecting the financial impact of this to be severe or extremely severe. So we're all bracing for something massive. Only 8% expected the financial impact to be either somewhat severe or not severe at all. So you can kind of see that we are all bracing for something major here. And I think we know that that is working out to be true. In reporting this data, it's really important to note that only 27% of the folks that have taken the survey have actually reported financial impacts, right? Which means about half either expected losses or had losses, but didn't have the information yet to report it, or just said it was too soon to tell for how much their losses were. So half of the people that responded to this survey have probably had some kind of losses that haven't reported. So that $9 million, $10 million number could be easily $40, $50 million in the next few months. So that's the kind of the hit that we're looking. That's not even counting the impact on the broader economy in terms of meals and souvenirs and transportation, et cetera. 40% of organizations said that they were expecting temporary permanent staff layoffs were likely or extremely likely. That's a huge number. It's one of the reasons why we're going to be talking about unemployment in a minute. And less than 30% said that layoffs weren't likely. And I think that number might be high. A lot of reasons because some of the organizations reporting simply did not hire people, that they were all volunteer organizations so that they wouldn't be having layoffs. So we definitely have a big impact in the arts sector. So how do we prioritize this? How do we start this conversation? What are we asking at the federal and state level, and even to a certain extent down to the county and city level? First and foremost, we want to make sure that nonprofits, particularly arts nonprofits, but really all nonprofits, are included in any government stimulus, emergency grant or loan programs, and economic recovery efforts. So any dollars or programs that are being made available to business so that they can recover, we want to make sure that some equal amount or equivalent amount of dollars and consideration are being given to the nonprofit arts sector, so that we can reignite and sustain those fires of our own creative engines and our economic engines in the arts. Unemployment is going to be a big part of this conversation as well. Certainly, we've got a lot of self-employed artists or gig artists. I mean, a lot of people talk about like the gig economy was created by Uber. I think those of us in the arts, particularly in music, know that we had a gig economy going long before we even had smartphones. So the gig economy is something that's ingrained in the arts. We have had a lot of unemployed artists that fall into this category that aren't covered. There is some federal relief coming, and I'll kind of go through that later. But we want to make sure that when we are having this conversation moving forward with the state legislature, that we're making sure that those self-employed and gig workers are covered, but also that we're increasing and expanding unemployment, because this is something that's going to be sustaining people for a really long time. So we've got to work on our safety net and making sure that it's designed for today's economy moving forward. And then, of course, charitable giving. We know that there was some, because they doubled the standard deduction back in December of 2017, that people weren't as motivated to write charitable donations off on their taxes. So anything that government can do through tax policy to incentivize charitable giving is going to be able to help us move through this. There are several other things that Arts North Carolina is working on and tracking across legislation in several states right now. But these are really the three overarching issues that we want to make sure that as everyone's having their conversations with elected officials, that we're touching on these specifically. So when you're having these remote conversations, right, like obviously we're not having Arts Day, we're not going out to have a cup of coffee, we're not going to a legislator's office, so what do we do? Well, obviously we're going to be talking about having phone calls, or we've all gotten very used to the Zoom meeting. Probably all of us have started using our video conferencing software a lot more in the last few weeks. So this is a really effective way to have these conversations. I just had some great meetings with a team from all across the state with officials that work for Senator Burns and Senator Burr and Senator Tillis, as well as some of our other congressional representatives as well. So this is a very effective way to have this conversation. That link right there will link you to a place where you can look up your congressional representatives or in your state House representatives, as well as your North Carolina state senator. And so that's how you can contact with those level of government. You can also look up contact information for your county and city officials through those websites. So you just really contact them by either phoning or emailing their office, making it clear that you would very much like to have a conversation, that you are a constituent, that you work in the arts, and that you want to have a conversation about the impact. Keep in mind that elected officials are insanely busy right now. So, I always tell people to be patient and persistent when making these meetings. We need to be, you can still be persistent, but maybe a little bit more cautiously so, and understand that, like I said before, there's so many things that are going on at all levels of government right now that maybe a conversation about their arts community isn't what they're prioritizing in this moment. If they say, I can't talk about this right now, it'll be fine. Call back, tell them you can follow up in a month, maybe send them an email or a letter that they can review at a different time, but try and be very understanding of the fact that we are all managing the effects of a pandemic. You can certainly have a conversation with just yourself. You don't have to do a big group like you do at Arts Day, but certainly organizing a group can be an effective way to get a lot of opinions across and tell a lot of stories all at once. So that's a good way to go about that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. You can use conference calls. That works fine if you're bringing a group together, or video conferences as well. I will say that it's always nice to offer to use your conference number or your video conference, but if the elected representative or their staff member throws out at the last minute, like, oh, we should use this, or oh, would you can you use our conference line? Just go with that flow, because you want their staff and the elected official to be comfortable within that conversation. So you try to accommodate them in that conversation as much as possible. Certainly when we're having these conversations, as I'm sure you've thought about, if it's going to be a video conference, you want to find a quiet place, even if it's just a phone conversation. But if it's going to be video, you might want to consider, your background and your lighting, and what that is. So you may have your organization step and repeat stored in your garage, so you can feel free to use that. But just give some thought to that. I've had conversations with a few people who have a window at high noon right behind them, and they just have to come across as a dark shadow. So make sure that they can see your face. Also, you might want to dress a little nicer. I don't think you have to wear a suit and tie to have a conversation with a legislator while you're sitting in your living room, but something a little nicer than a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. If you're having a group conversation, it's a really good idea to have one person sort of be the lead. Doesn't mean he's the boss or she's the boss. It just kind of means that they're going to moderate that conversation to help make that. And maybe it's usually a good idea if that's the person that set up the meeting and was the point of contact. You want to make sure you establish a speaking order. Alphabetical works great because, none of us picked our names. So just kind of, but whatever you use, draw straws, however, roll die, but just make sure that you know who's going to speak when. Also have an idea of what everybody is in the group is going to say, if you have time to coordinate that, to avoid, repeating things or worse yet, contradicting each other. You can share materials if you're going to have a video chat, but by using screen share, much like I'm doing this webinar now, and you could show pictures or graphs or even a short video, though that might get a little weird if the video goes too long. But I do think you have to be ready that because this actually happened to me with a congressman from North Carolina, had a video chat set up and at the last minute switched to a phone chat, or someone phoned into a video chat. So don't necessarily rely on those materials, but if you want them to see that, email it ahead of time, and then it'll be there for them to reference, if not during the conversation, then later on. As you're entering into the conversation, particularly if it's a group conversation, have the leader sort of start off the conversation by either introducing everyone or having everyone introduce themselves in order, and then maybe giving a little overview about what they're going to be talking about. What are we going to hit on, the impact on the arts in this county and what we're going to be asking for today, etc. And then the leader can kind of moderate and say, okay, Bob's going to be talking next, Susie's going to be talking next. Just to sort of kind of keep the flow going. Also, everybody in turn should be telling their story, right? I always say, never tell a story without a number, never tell a number about a story. So what kind of stories do we want to tell, right? Well, we want to talk about the impact that the arts were having in your community before this horrible thing happened, and before we were all trapped in our own homes, and before we were dealing with the public health crisis that we're dealing with, and the value that it had then, because so we can kind of paint a picture for what it was. We can certainly have some stories about how hard this is going to hit the arts, or how hard it already has hit the arts, in terms and the struggles that people are going through. And also some of those silver lining stories as well are really important, about generosity and community. I know that when we saw the Italians standing on their balconies singing to one another, right? I mean, you could kind of get a feeling of hope there. And that can be really important in connecting to a legislator and kind of painting a picture of all that the arts can provide. But you got to make sure you got a number that sort of ties that into a reality. And that's a lot of the numbers that we were talking about. We had all those economic impact data from 2015 to show what a strong economic driver we were before this happened. And also the estimated impact of what is going to happen and how bad the arts are going to be hit. So you can kind of illustrate your points with the numbers, so they know that your story is sort of every story of arts across the state. As you're having these conversations, make sure that you kind of go with the flow. If you get asked a question, don't try and finish what you were saying. Go ahead and answer a question. It's a conversation. It should work back and forth. And actually, if you find yourself in a conversation with a legislator where you're answering questions back and forth and actually talking more than you are just presenting a series of stories, that's a much more productive conversation. So it's not a presentation, it's a conversation. And if it's two-sided, that's all the better. And if someone doesn't agree with you, that's fine. You can agree to disagree. Just always try and stay positive, and just, express your opinion as you feel it. Then at the end of that conversation, try and stay in with whatever allotted time, or if you're starting to get a sense that that time is coming and that legislator has somewhere to be, that leader or that moderator can sort of thank the official for their time, sort of sum up first. Well, you can see that we're impacted. This is what we're asking for, et cetera, and thank them for their time. So make sure you kind of wrap up on time. I know I'm always preaching thank you notes, though obviously going out for stamps right now might not necessarily be the best thing. So in this particular sense, if you don't have time or means to send a handwritten thank you note or a letter, definitely be following up with an email. Emails are also great to send follow-up information as well, be that links to studies or reports or surveys or things of that nature. Or the Arts NC website. We're always happy to have legislators visit us there as well. But definitely always make sure you say thank you. So I did want to kind of touch on that federal legislation, because actually at the federal level, as many of you know, we had a lot of calls to action in Congress. We were working closely with Americans for the Arts to figure out what was going on at the federal level and make sure that we could bring that information to you as it was happening. And you're going to see a lot of these things addressed in federal legislations were from that set of priorities that we talked about later, those arts priorities for the state and at the federal level. The phase one was called the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriation. This was their first swing at dealing with the coronavirus issue at all. Provided much needed funding for medical supplies and certain national health agencies to kind of get funding to start to ramp up our health industry to get prepared for the pandemic. And also started to provide some initial funding for Small Business Administration loans. And this was early March, so this was not the PPP that we're going to be talking about in a second. This was just starting to get the regular Small Business Administration loans up and running. The next phase to come out of this was called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That link will actually take you to the Arts North Carolina summary of what that probably means specifically for nonprofits. It did provide some additional funding for COVID-19 testing. We hear a lot about that testing in the news, so this was the first attempt to get our testing ramped up in the nation, as well as some initial funding for unemployment insurance programs. that were being funded statewide. Again, this is not the big change that came in phase 3, but this was just the initial ramp up as this was going. The big change here was made specific COVID-19 related changes to sick leave and family medical leave policy. I'm not going to go into a ton of details in this particular webinar. The slides are available, and so you can click the link, or you can go to our website to get more information about specifically what those changes are. But they were designed to make sure that people didn't feel like they had to go to work sick, had to go to work when they were caring for someone who was sick, or had to go to work when they were caring for a child whose school was closed because of the pandemic. So more information on our website. And then the big $2.2 trillion enchilada came out about less than 2 weeks ago, actually. You know, the top line story in all of this is that all U.S. citizens are going to be receiving, who have filed income taxes, not paid them, but who have filed that, you know, as U.S. citizens, are going to get checks in the mail or directly deposited in their bank account. $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 if you're filing jointly, plus $500 for each child. For an individual filing, that number will be reduced if you make over $75,000. If you file jointly, if your combined income or household income is over $150,000, then that number will be reduced some and adjusted as well. Also provided some emergency funding to some industries. I know the first one we talked about is the airline industry. They got hit pretty hard, so there was some funding in there. But in that emergency funding pile was money for the National Endowment for the Arts. The NEA was specifically intended to go out to arts organizations through the National Endowment for the Arts with no match required. That's actually written into the law, so they cannot require you to have matching grants. They've actually just put out the guidelines today for the NEA money. It was always going to be written into the legislation. 40% of that is going to state arts agencies. So the North Carolina Arts Council is going to get 500,000 of that. There's some guidelines on how that's going to spend, but based on my conversations, I see most, if not every dollar of that going out across North Carolina as some kind of COVID-19 relief. The other 60% of that is going to be sent out into grants directly from organizations. I just found out today that it looks like those grants are going to be $50,000 each, and they will go out, or up to $50,000 each, and they will go out specifically to organizations that have applied or that have received NEA grants within the last 4 years. So if you have received an NEA grant in the last 4 years, then you are eligible to apply for one of these grants at the National Endowment for the Arts. I haven't had a chance to follow up because this is new information. So hopefully that information is available at the NEA website as well. I believe that's arts.gov. Also funded in this, there was funding for the National Endowment for the Humanities, Institute of Museum and Library Services, Corporation Public Broadcasting, the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center received $25 million, and they still are dealing with massive layoffs, as well as some community block grants that went across the country. Some of those are going to be going to arts organizations as well. So in addition to those dollars, there was a substantial expansion of loan and grant programs of the Small Business Administration. I know there's a lot of interest in that. I'm just doing a brief overview here. We are going to be posting a webinar that was done earlier today by Artswell TV through Triangle Artworks. Did a really great job of diving into this. I urge you all to check that out as well. Hopefully we'll have that posted by tomorrow. Payroll Protection Program is forgivable loans to businesses. So you can borrow up to 2.5 times your payroll through your lender, right? So you've got to go to a bank. I know a lot of people are waiting to hear or waiting to apply or have applied, waiting for it to go through the process. So those are 100% forgivable. So that loan that would be a loan of 2.5 times your payroll that you would pay back over 2 years at 2.75% interest if you're a nonprofit gets completely forgiven, basically turning that into a grant if you spend it on 75% of it on payroll, and then 25% of it can go to other things such as rent, and other payroll expenses and facility expenses as well. And there's obviously a lot of other resources. You can check out our website as well. You can also get funds through economic disaster loans. Those disaster loans are not forgivable, though they have a very low interest rate and a long payout. So it can be an option for some organizations. Also, through that disaster loan, you can also apply for a $10,000 disaster grant. That's a great way to get cash fast. And then if you get approved for the loan, you don't have to take it. So if you need, but that emergency grant is basically forgivable. So it will be subtracted from the forgivable amount of money that you may have gotten through your payroll protection program. So and you can't spend it on the same thing. So yes, there are dollars that are available out there, but just be very careful as to how many times you're applying and that you're not applying for the same expenses. And there's some great resources out there that sort of dive into the intricacies of that. And the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. As I said, one of our main priorities right from the start of this was that those that weren't covered, those self-employed artists and those gig workers, those performance workers that weren't typically covered under state unemployment got coverage. Those people are going to be covered at $600 for everybody for up to 4 months. So that's a huge move that now we've got some coverage for everybody. It also extends the length of your state benefits. So if you were somebody that was already going to be getting state benefits, let's say for the max of $350, then you would have applied. You would use up you would get 950, being 600 plus your 350 for 13 weeks. Then when 4 months ran out, then you would lose the 600, and then but if you still had needed those state benefits of 350, that would extend that an additional 13 weeks up to 25 weeks. I do encourage everybody, if you have questions about unemployment, the DES site, the North Carolina Department of Employment Security site, has gotten much better over the last few days. Their FAQ section has gotten a lot better. They are still waiting on guidance for implementing these programs. You can apply if you are unemployed, but they will not be able to address your claim until they get all of the guidance and everything sorted out. There are obviously massive backlogs, both with the lenders and with the unemployment. This is happening in every state across the entire country. Please be patient. I know if you're unemployed and you are running out of money, that's very difficult to do. If your company is in trouble, that's also very difficult to do. But they are moving through this process as quickly as they can. These are massive new programs. They have completely had to double, triple, quadruple what they are doing in a period of a few short weeks. So they are getting up to speed. So just kind of be patient as you move through that process. And also included in this phase 3 legislation was the temporary universal tax deduction for up to $300. So actually people will be incentivized to donate to nonprofits. Certainly we hope to arts nonprofits. So we are seeing that this was in the messages that we were sending to Congress. All of these things that are 3 primaries that were included in funding, that were included in loan programs and relief programs, that unemployment is addressed for everyone, and that they address charitable tax donations. All of those things were addressed in the federal legislation, in large part, to the advocacy work that we've been doing at the national level, and our partners nationally were doing at the national level as well. So we are encouraging folks now that if you want to start those conversations with legislators at the state level, start talking through these things. I will say that, at Arts North Carolina, we are having conversations about specifically what is happening at the General Assembly, and then what might be specific efforts in terms of relief packages. We're not having those conversations publicly yet because we're not really sure exactly where the North Carolina General Assembly is going to break. So you can have these conversations vaguely about that if there's relief for the business community, that there should also be relief for the arts community, et cetera, and talk in these broad terms, so that when we're able to put forth specific proposals, that will be covered in the conversations that you've had as well. So with that, we can see whether or not there's any questions about Arts North Carolina and what we're doing, or our resources, how to approach advocacy, impact, facts, figures. Do we have any questions on the chat box, Christine?
Hang on a second. Okay, so somebody suggested that we ask for the cap on deductible donations be large, for instance, $10,000. I know that some arts organizations do depend on those large donations.
Absolutely. So I would say that at the federal level, because really the state policy on tax, particularly on charitable donations, often follows the federal policy. So getting it changed at the federal level is going to be our biggest win there. This has been a conversation that we've been having for over 3 years about making sure that universal charitable deduction is there. And up until this moment, we have been unable to even get our foot in the door. So now that we have gotten this $300 cap in there, but the charitable deduction, even though it's got a relatively low threshold, it's become part of the solution. As part of the solution, it can be expanded to continue to address the problem. So this was step one, because it's like, oh, well, it's only a $300 deduction. And now it's a little easier to say, oh, what about a 3,000? Well, what about a 10,000? What about a 30,000? So this is the very first important step that we hope to see grow. That we work with, certainly North Carolina Center for Nonprofits is a key partner with us in the work that we do. And then the National Council for Nonprofits at the federal level that they work with. So we're always coordinating our messages. And if you see us pushing calls to actions and things for those organizations, that's exactly why. So I hope that helps to see a light at the end of that tunnel there for the tax question.
And I think that's about it for right now. Okay.
Well, fantastic. Well, everybody, I want to thank you again for tuning into the webinar. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, particularly our champion sponsors, Arts Council Fayetteville, Cumberland County, and Blumenthal Performing Arts Center down in Charlotte. But really all of our sponsors that helped to make our work possible, and who went over and above just being members of Arts North Carolina, but invested in our programming that much further. And everybody, thank you so very much for taking the time today to listen. And if you have any further questions about advocacy or what you should be doing, please feel free to shoot me an email at nate@artsnc.org. Thank you and have a great day.